Let's dive right into Photoshop. So if you go ahead and open the Photoshop, you should see something like this. I'm using, at the time of this recording, the latest and newest version of Photoshop CC, which is the 2020 version. You can check out the version of Photoshop by going to the Photoshop menu at the top, clicking About Photoshop, and then you can see 21.0.1, which is this current release. If you're using an older version of Photoshop or a newer version of Photoshop, that should be perfectly fine. Photoshop and Adobe make some changes over time, and I'll make sure to update this course with any major updates. But the process of using Photoshop has stayed relatively the same over the past 5+ years, and so you should be able to follow along no matter what version you're using. So the first thing you're probably wondering is, how do I get started? There are a few different ways to open up a project in Photoshop. So how do you open up a project or a photo in Photoshop? It's actually really easy. If you go to your documents and download the supplemental resources for this course, you'll have a zip file, and if you open it up, it should have a number of time as well. Starting out, we're going to work through one and then go beyond that with some additional products later. If you go to the folder, you should find photos that I've used or the assets that I've used, as well as the Photoshop files. And within each folder, you should find a couple different options. You should find one that is the final version, which is the version that I created so that you can have as a reference for what you might be trying to get to, and then also a starter project. So how do you open a Photoshop file? You can right-click, open in Photoshop, or if you only have one version of Photoshop, I have two versions on my computer, CC 2019 and CC 2020, so it gives me an option. But if you just double-click that project, it should open it up. What if you want an individual photo in Photoshop to work with, or any photo that you have on your computer, really? Right-click that photo and choose in Photoshop. And that's going to open photo up in Photoshop. There are other ways to open a file. You can have file open, and that will open up and from here you can find either a Photoshop file or photo, and it will open it up in Photoshop if you click open. To open existing file. Now you might be wondering how to create an exact square or a specific size. We're going to begin this, and don't worry about that. But now you know how to open up file types. I know this might look very confusing to you, and don't worry, we are going to interface and everything like that in the next lessons. But for now, give a round of applause because you can now at least open Photoshop even yet. If you already are very comfortable with Photoshop, I know it's great for you, but it is a good first step for anyone who's just starting out. Lesson, which is going to be a deeper dive into the interface and customizing it so that you can really set it up to be a Photoshop editor. All right, see you then. To start this lesson, make sure you have Project 1 open. This is in the PSD files folder under Project 1, not the final one, but just the other option, resizing and placing layers. You should see something like this, and this is the basic layout of Photoshop. At the top, we have our menu with drop-down options for all kinds of different things. We're going to be going through a lot of these throughout the course. Basic file menu where you can save your project for new projects, edit and image menus that allow you to edit the canvas, which is what we call the project itself, or the specific images that are in your project. A layer menu, which is how you can edit the layers, etc., etc. This is, I don't want to dive too deep into what each thing is because that's not how I want to teach this class, and I don't think that's the best way to learn. I think the best way to learn is to learn through practical projects and examples, and through the course, you're going to learn what most of these options are, but it's not a course where I'm going to say, okay, the first thing is File, New. What does New do? The next thing, File, Open. What does Open do? Because I don't think that's the best way to retain information. But just knowing that your top menu is a great place to access a lot of options is good to know. Below this, you have your canvas right here. This is your main Photoshop project area where you're going to be doing all of your editing, you're typing out text, adding shapes. That's this main area where you're seeing your actual images. Going to the left, you have your toolbar. So the toolbar is where you have all your tools. You have tools that can crop your images, tools that can paint on your images, you have brushes, text, all kinds of things. Again, we'll be going through these one at a time throughout the course. It's not a course where I'm going to go just start at the top and go one by one, but know that we will be covering these through the entire course. If you hover over each tool, you kind of get a pop-up and the name of the tool, and it kind of shows you what it does. And then if you click and hold, you can see that for some of these tools, there's other options. So if you see this little arrow on the bottom of each tool, if it has that, which I think pretty much everyone does now, except for the zoom tool down here, there are other options that you can get to it that are related to the main tool. On the top, you have your sort of tool adjustment bar or tool settings bar. So depending on the tool that you have open, you'll have different settings up here that you can adjust to change how that tool works. Moving over to the right-hand side, you have several panels. Now, the way that this looks right now is what it should look like if you just open up Photoshop for the very first time. Now, I probably have mentioned this in the very beginning, but if you are have used Photoshop before, your layout might look a little different, and the panels or these windows, which is what we call panels in Photoshop, those might look different for you. What you probably want to do is go either up to Window, Workspace, and then choose Essentials, which is the default view or setup for this. There's different view options or setups depending on what kind of editing you're doing. Now, there's another place to get to this. If you click this drop down right here, it's this little icon that looks like the Photoshop layout itself, and then you can change it. If you're on Essentials and it doesn't look like this, click the Reset Essentials button because you might have moved some panels around or things like that. And by clicking Reset Essentials, it will get back to this basic Essentials view. And that's important as we move forward so that we're all on the same page. Let me just show you though, if I go to Workspace and change it to graphic or photography, for example, it changes what the windows are up here. Or say, let's go to graphic and web. Again, it changes what is up here or the panels that are open. And you can see as I do that, there are different panels for all sorts of things. You've got color, swatches, gradient patterns. These are how you select colors that you're going to be using in your project. Below that, you have libraries and adjustments. Libraries is something that's really cool with Adobe where you can save specific color swatches, even things like photos or brand images like logos that you always have quick access to in your library. Below that, you have layers, channels, paths. So the layer panel is actually one where we're going to be working a lot in. And if you kind of look down below, you can see some layers already that I've created in this project. We have a bird layer, a kid layer, an elephant layer. We're going to be diving into this in more detail in a future lesson, but you can start to understand how Photoshop works by looking at the layer panel and seeing all the different layers we have. And that's basically how Photoshop works, is we're layering different images and effects and graphics on top of each other to create a brand new piece of art. So these panels can be adjusted and moved around and customized to what you think you're going to need to use for your specific project. There's one other bar right here that has more panels. It's kind of a way to hide or minimize the real estate that it takes up in your window. But there's different ones, and you can actually move panels onto this bar, which we'll be showing you in the next lesson. But just so you see these panels that are open. If you go up to Window, you can see which panels are open by seeing which ones have check marks next to them. So for example, if we want to have our character panel open, click Character. Now we have our character panel open on this bar. Character is our options for text. And it also opens the paragraph panel as well, which is related to character. And if you've ever, edited pretty much any text in any sort of application, even like Microsoft Word, you'll be familiar with what paragraph options there are. That's a lot. I know this is a lot, and this is kind of a whirlwind. If you feel like, hey, Phil, this is getting a little bit too in-depth right this second, don't worry. We're going to be going over all of these things, and by the end of this course, you're going to be so comfortable with it. Now, if you're like, this is super basic, I know all this, let's get to the good stuff, well, just be a little bit more patient because we're there. But for anyone who's brand new to Photoshop, understanding this stuff is a little bit complicated. I know that. But now you know the basic workspace and also how to change your workspaces here. So in the next lesson, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into customizing the workspace and panels to get to a view that I think is going to be perfect moving forward. Here's just a sort of quick add-on lesson to the last one about customizing your workspace. All of these panels and windows can be customized exactly how you want it. So as you saw, there are different tabs that open up other panels. We can close these tabs. For example, you might not need the library tab, so just right-click and choose Close. For adjustments, you might not want that as well, so let's just click Close there as well. Color, I think, is definitely important. You can also adjust the size of these panels. For example, a lot of times in these projects, you're going to be adding a ton of layers, and you might want this layer panel to be even bigger. You can also drag to the left or right, depending on how much space or size you need there. Maybe you're editing a project that has a lot of text. So instead of having the character panel just be a pop-up here, you can actually click and move any of these panels around and add it to a new sort of window. So you can see as I hover, these different windows or blocks get highlighted. So if I highlight, if you're moving it and it highlights the entire block and you drop it, it adds it to that existing block. Now it kind of made it small, or the color bigger, because the character panel is only so tall. But if we go back to the layers panel, you can see that it makes this bigger. If we click and hover this over the window again, and we put it just at the top edge or to the left edge, you can see what happens where it actually creates a brand new block or a brand new window. I can then take my paragraph panel and drop it into this block, And you can click and drag them to the left or right, these tabs, to order them to have one in front of the other. And that's kind of your default option. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have my paragraph settings and my character panel settings in this bar because I think that's important. My layers, I'm going to have go make it super big like that. For now, we're going to leave our color and switches, everything like this. And I think that's pretty much good to go. One other thing, just so that you're aware of, if you are working with multiple projects open in Photoshop, you can see that they have tabs up here in the main canvas window right here. So just so you're aware, if you need to open multiple projects, you can do that, and you can just switch from one tab to the next, or one project to the next with this tab. One other thing is, if you want your tools to be a little bit more compressed, click this little arrow button, and you can kind of see these arrows over here as well, and that's going to typically expand or contract or compress any of these panels. So I typically work with my tools up and down like this, but if you want to see all of them, which might be a little bit easier, it's like that. Otherwise, you're kind of losing out on some of the tools underneath. It's kind of cropped off. So actually opening it up like that is probably pretty good for us. So hopefully you understand about how to customize your workspace and panels, and the goal now is to do the same. So go to your Photoshop app if you're following along and make it look something like this with these panels open and the tools like so. And we'll see you in the next lesson. Now that you know a little bit more about the Photoshop interface and how to get around the different elements, I think it's a good idea to back up a little bit and learn how to open up or start a new Photoshop file from scratch. So I'm going to exit out of the projects that I had opened before. You can also, if you have those open, file new, and it's going to bring open this window for a new Photoshop document. Or if you're opening up Photoshop and you have this window, just click Create New. This window has a lot of pre-built templates that you can use, so you can see any recent documents that you've started. For example, if you are always creating a YouTube thumbnail like I do, I have a couple different projects that have those dimensions already so that I don't have to create it from scratch. Or you can these tabs up here and you can kind of see some common options. So under print, you have your vertical 8.5 by 11 inch paper file. For web, you have different ones for like websites, mobile, film and video. Again, this is a great one to get straight to the perfect size for a thumbnail, for your YouTube video, or whatever it is, or a graphic for your video, depending on the presets. But if you want to create something completely from scratch, you go over to this panel over in the right side, or you can start with one of these options that you have and then customize. Either way works. But here we have on our right hand side, we have the different options. So you have a name. So if you want to call it a certain thing, so we'll call this, maybe we'll call this social, if I could spell, social post. Social post, we might want to make a square. And then below the title you give it, you have your options for the size and the aspect ratio. So you have your width and height, and this is in inches currently, but you can change this. So for example, if you want to work in pixels, which is common for anything that's going to go online, you can use pixels, and say we want something to be a perfect square, we would put the width to be 1000 by 1000. And I'm just tabbing through these and using my keyboard, or you can just click and type in your numbers. Say, so now the orientation for a square doesn't matter if it's portrait or landscape, which you can see here, I can't click, but say it was inches. So say we have, and you can see that when I go back to inches, it converts those pixels to inches for us. But say we have a 5:7 photo, but we want to change it automatically to orientation or to a landscape orientation, you can just click this button and it will kind of swap these numbers to change the orientation. Let's go back to our pixels though. And now let's go 1000 by 1000. The next option is this artboards checkbox. Now, artboards is something that is newer to Photoshop, and if you've used Adobe Illustrator, you are familiar with what artboards are. But we'll be going into depth about this later on in this section. But basically, what this allows you to do is have multiple versions of a project that you're working on up at one time. So before, we would have to open up multiple different Photoshop files to have like 2 different projects we're working on. But now with artboards, you can actually have like 2 1000 by 1000 pixel projects or graphics that you're working on in one project. I know that sounds a little confusing, but for now, just leave that unchecked and we'll go into that later on. Resolution. This has to do with the quality of your graphic. So you can see here we have currently it says 300. And then on the right it says pixels per inch. In the US we're using inches, but in other parts of the world, or depending on what project you're working on, you might want to use pixels per centimeter. But really what this means is it's going to have 300 pixels per inch, which is a lot. Little individual pixels per inch of a graphic or a project. The higher the resolution obviously means the higher resolution and the higher quality, but you don't really need to go above 300 typically. It's kind of the upper limit of what you would want for anything, even for print documents. You can go even lower. 72 is kind of a standard lower end resolution. 100 to 50 is kind of your mid-range. And so you can play around with it, but typically staying around 150 is going to be perfectly fine. If you had literally 1 pixel per inch, this would mean that for every inch of project, it would have 1 pixel, which is an individual color basically. And if pixels are a little confusing to you, something you might want to refer to is the resolution of like your television. A lot of television, you see the 4K resolution or the standard 1080p resolution. So for now, we're just going to leave it at that. The only other thing to note is that if you have a higher resolution, it's going to increase the file size. So sometimes you might not need to go higher and might not want to go higher, even if you could, to kind of minimize that file from getting too big. So let's just leave it at 150 for now. Next, you have your color mode. So typically, you're going to want to work in RGB color. There's color modes. A couple are popular, RGB and then CMYK. CMYK is popular for print. So if you know you're going to be printing a product out, you might want to work in CMYK because if you go to a printer and your project is in RGB, then the colors might end up a little bit different than what you were expecting. But for any sort of online graphic, use RGB, and of course like grayscale, that's going to just be black and white. Along with this color mode, you have 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit. I would leave it on 8-bit. The higher the bit means the number of basically shades of color that are available to you in a project or when you're working on a graphic. 8-bit is perfectly fine for pretty much any project that you would need, unless you are more advanced and you know, for example, if you're working on some sort of graphic for 3D animation or for an app or something, and whoever's asked you to create the graphic says, I need it in 16-bit color, you know where to change that, but for now, just leave it at 8-bit. Under this, you have your background contents. So right now, this is basically what the background of your project will be. So right now it's set to white, and we'll see what that looks like. But you can change this to a specific color, or if you click this drop-down menu, you can choose a transparent color, or lack of color, really, just transparency. So if you're creating something like a logo where you don't want a background, you can have it be transparent. Now, this does more have to do with the background of your canvas that you're working on. You can always change the background color or add a layer with the color to a project to a different color. And that would be done in your project itself. This is more just in terms of the canvas and how it looks when you're working. And I'll show you this in just a second. And then there are a couple advanced options for color profile and pixel aspect ratio. Again, these are more advanced. You would probably know when you need to change these if you know what these are. Color profiles, this will change depending on what monitor you're using. And for the pixels, again, if you're using or creating something for a specific video project, you might change this. But for you watching this course, I'm going to bet you that you just want to leave it at square pixels and the color profile at whatever it is set to right now for you. All right, you still with me? Because now we're going to click create, and it's going to open up this project. And you can see that it has a white background. Really quickly, I'm just going to click file new. I'm going to change the background to black and click create. And then we're going to go to file new and change the background to transparent and click create. So you can see if I tab between these, the different options you have for the background being a specific color. And the transparency is this checkerboard pattern. So if you ever see this sort of checkerboard, it means that it's going to be transparent. Like I said, perfect for editing or creating logos or graphics where you don't want a background. That being said, you can still create graphics in these other projects and turn on your background. And I'll just show you really quickly, even though we haven't gone over the layers panel. If you check on this little eyeball option next to the background, first we have to turn off the lock, which this background layer is typically locked in the beginning. And then when we turn off that eyeball, you can see that it becomes transparent. So this is sort of just a temporary background that's locked. Same here with this black background. Unlock it, it becomes a layer instead of a background, and you can now turn that on or off. So there's kind of multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, and you'll realize that as you go through the course. And if you take other courses or watch other tutorials by other people, you'll see that they do things differently in Photoshop. And that's completely fine. I'm showing you the ways that I do different things that makes the most sense to me, and I hope that it works for you. But like I said, there's lots of different ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. It's such an advanced application. But now you know how to open up a project at any sort of size or aspect ratio in Photoshop. So congrats to you. That's a big step, and we'll see you in the next. In this lesson, you'll learn how to place photos or graphics into a project that you've created from scratch. So I've gone ahead and closed the project. Go to this project. Probably one of the easiest is if you open up your documents or your photo, and on a Mac, I can select a photo, for example, and then just tab back over to Photoshop, which for Mac Command Tab, and you can go through. For a PC, it's probably Control Tab, and then I'm still holding that image and drop it into my project like so. So now that photo is in my project. It's still in sort of a temporary place mode. It's wanting me to actually drop it somewhere, so I can move it around with the move tool. I can resize it if I take these corners and move it up and down, it resizes, or the sort of handles on the corners are in. Click and move it around. Only until I press the return key on my keyboard does it actually place it and drop it into the project. So you'll see, press return. There, it's now on my project, and I can then go about editing it or other photos. Another way you can place an image is going to the file linked option. Click place link. Go there, you can find another photo and then click place. And you see that it automatically sizes it as close as possible to the project or the canvas that you started. So you can see that it matches width and height of this project. If you want it smaller or bigger, again, you can kind of move it around. And the return key to place it, because now see if I'm kind of moving around, I try the bird, for example, it's not going to let me. You see that my mouse turns into the rotate option where I can rotate this image if I want and happen outside of the image. I can press Command Z to undo anything. The other thing you might want to know is there are a couple keyboard shortcuts that are handy. So if you are rotating, if you hold the Shift key down, kind of it to some specific rotations, and you can see the degree of rotation hovering next to my mouse as I do this. See, it's 15, goes back to 0, negative 15, etc. It locks it to those, it's, I guess, every 15 instead of just a free-for-all. So that's going to help, especially if you have an image and you want 90 degrees. Another keyboard shortcut to note is the Shift. If you click any of the handles, which are these little blocks around the edge that you use to resize an image, it allows you to stretch skew this image. If I'm not holding the Shift button, it locks it to aspect ratio, and you can see after I kind of squished it and then I undo the Shift button, it now locks it to that aspect and it'll resize it, but I'm going to undo that as I don't with the aspect of this. A couple more are the Option or Alt key. Clicking any of these handles, and if you hold the Option on see how it scales from the center? That's a super handy one to note. Hold the Command button on a PC, that would be Control, and you click any of these edges, it warps just that handle or from that corner or whatever. So you can do key with this. It does the whole side or top if you click the center handle. If you click the corner with the Command button selected, it locks the other hand, allows you just to warp that sort of side or that corner of the image. So again, you can get creative with that. The one that I use most is the Option key that allows me to scale from the center. And then finally, press Return to put this photo and place it into this project. You'll notice as I do that, our layer panel starts to fill it up. There's a complete section coming up on the layers panel on how to kind of start to see what's happening. The bird is below our boy. The technique is you can move these layers up and down. So now we have our bird on top of our boy. Cool. So that's pretty much how you place photos and graphics. The same, any sort of logos or PNG graphics with transparent backgrounds. It's the same process of just placing it in the project. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the